we cannot set the table until we salute the ancestors. That we know. We want to, in addition to the thanks we've offered earlier, at this point, having held as an epigraph for the Vision and Justice Now convening this image on the screen for 2 days, acknowledge and thank another ancestor, an artist who became one too soon, Nona Faustine. One of the gifts of teaching and teaching from art is that you can see before you lives transformed through that encounter. At the Cooper Gallery at Harvard at the Hutchins Center, we're fortunate enough to have an extraordinary exhibition co-curated by Cheryl Finley and Deborah Willis, which included works by Nona Faustine. And we stood for weeks in front of her My Country series. This work is Fragment of Evidence from 2019. And a few weeks later, my students learned that she passed. And the ability to take forward what they had learned about her practice with additional gravitas, with power, and with grace is an experience I'll never forget. So I want to thank Shannon Simmons for allowing us to have this image. Grace, all of our program materials, thank you so much for allowing us to salute the legacy of Nona Faustine, who is with us today. We'll now hear from a former student of mine, the brilliant Elijah DeVaughn.
Good afternoon. How we doing? Gonna have some lunch. We feeling good? My name is Elijah DeVaughn, and my journey to this podium started a long ways away. I've come to tell you a story about vision and justice, about imagination and promise, about the power to see, a gift possessed by you and by me. And our story begins in a place I never thought I'd be. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in a room and the tables were arranged in an L shape and a podium sat positioned before us. The room felt like the kind of place where history had already happened. It had one window, and waiting for the boss to arrive, I looked outside. The lawn was manicured with tactical precision. I admired its beauty. And then a large man in a suit appeared with an earpiece. And I knew that that was a sure sign the boss was near. Soon he entered and we stood. Slowly, but with grace and power, he walked in. This was the boss, the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden. As he took his seat, I waited for him to give his thoughts on a speech draft that we had been working on. You see, at the age of 23, I was offered a job to be the speechwriter to the President of the United States. It was a job, hilarious, right? It was a job I never imagined having. To be honest, I didn't even know what the hell a speechwriter was. But God has a funny way of blessing us with things beyond our understanding. So there I was, a young black boy, a descendant of the enslaved, sitting in the map room of the White House, built by enslaved folks, helping the President of the United States find the words he would etch in history. The president and advisors in the room liked the draft, but they did this thing that they often did. They said, we need to drive home democracy, democracy, democracy. That's what's on the line. And in these moments, I would often say, just telling people about democracy wasn't going to cut it. Because for folks who come from where I'm from, democracy doesn't mean much because its promise has never quite showed up in their lives. Now, I'm from Compton. in South Central Los Angeles. And over 3/4 of a century ago, my great-grandmother decided to make that journey that a lot of our great-grandmothers made. She left the South. Fleeing racial violence, she journeyed as an expectant wanderer, landing in the Golden State. California was her hope, and Compton became her home. There she raised 3 generations of children, including me. In fact, she just turned 92. She's still kicking. But time proved Compton to be a place of both glory and grief, a place she and I call home, but also a place littered with dreams deferred and denied. My family came of age in the 80s and 90s when South Central Los Angeles suffered from drugs and poverty and crime as a result of systemic neglect. Too many men in my family either knew carceral detention or premature death as their destiny. So my birth was a beacon of hope. May 4th, 99. I know I'm a little young. I know. And my family prayed that my life would be different. But shortly after I was born, reality hit. My dad was sentenced to 16 years in federal prison, all for nonviolent drug offenses. So hope quickly dissipated and fear set in. Would I make it? Could I make it? Only time would tell. And time did tell. My mom, she's a longtime public school teacher in South LA. She found a nonprofit that takes kids from underprivileged areas and helps them get into private schools. And it was through this nonprofit that I won a scholarship at 5 years old to a school a world away from Compton. On weekdays, I took the bus to school, an hour-long ride where I witnessed the world change around me. I would journey away from Compton, a place of aging homes filled with black and brown strivers, folks who got up every day and tried their best to provide for their families. And soon I would arrive at a school nestled in what felt like an oasis. This was a place of towering abodes, quite literally, white picket fences where folks wanted for very little and opportunity was never in short supply. On that bus ride, the world changed before my eyes. It seemed like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. That was weekdays. On the weekend, my mom would take me to visit my dad in prison. These visits excited me because they were a chance to learn about the man whose name I bore. I'm named after my father. But sitting in the family room, I noticed that many of the prisoners wearing the requisite uniform, white shirt and brown khakis, also shared my complexion. Why did so many of these men in chains look like me? I wondered. You see, it's a funny thing. We often see before we know. Our eyes first tell us the secrets of our world that we only later understand once we find the words. And it was in a class with Professor Sarah Lewis that the words found me. Frederick Douglass wrote, "Poets, prophets, and reformers are all picture makers. This ability is the secret of their talents and achievements. They see what ought to be by the reflection of what is and endeavor to remove the contradiction." And wasn't that it? When I rode the bus to school every day, I could see what ought to be by the reflection of the dichotomy between the place where I was growing up and the school that I attended. When I used to go visit my dad in prison on the weekends, I could see what ought to be by the reflection of what was, knowing that all the black men in the prison looking like me couldn't possibly be justice. You see, the aesthetics of these worlds I traversed, the ground itself showed me what kinds of people were valued in this country and what kinds of people weren't. To bear witness to Compton, to the prison, showed me better than anyone could tell me who our government cared for and who American democracy left behind. The truth is, for people like me who come from where I come from, we were always waiting for the promise of democracy to knock on the door, but lives lived and lost reminded us that she never came. But on Sundays, Mom and I attended a small church in Compton called Faith Inspirational. It was there every Sunday that black and brown folks filled the pews. It was there that these folks striving in a marooned world who often felt like they were forgotten were reminded that they were children of God too. That they too, with their mahogany hues, were made in God's image. But to be made in God's image is not merely to share in his likeness. To be made in the image of God means that God too makes us through our imaginations, speaks to us through our imaginations. I'm reminded of the verse in Proverbs, where there is no vision, people perish, my pastor would say. As children of God, I learned in that small Baptist church in Compton, we're all made in his image, but we're all too endowed with divine imagination, such that we have the capacity for emancipatory vision. It was this fact that kept people in Compton going. Even though we felt forgotten, we held on to dreams that our city and our country could be different. Even though we felt like nobody, we imagined one day we would be somebody, dignified and respected. Even though it felt as though we traversed a hellish landscape, because of the power of our imagination, we could see heaven in our hands. We could feel heaven in our spirits. It was in that church on Sundays that we were reminded that we were prophets too, that we could remake the country in our image. We were picture makers, as Frederick Douglass teaches. So we had the power to draw America anew. It brings me back to the map room in the White House. I said something like this to the president, but I promise you it was more succinct when I said it in the meeting. And he said, "That's good. Sounds like we have some more work to do." I left the meeting and walked back through the West Wing. I sat down at my desk reflecting. While the promise of democracy eluded folks from Compton, it never stopped living in us. For the people who raised me, visions of a better world always nestled in their spirits. Vision and justice. The order here to me is instructive, for vision always leads and justice follows. How we imagine what our world can be, how we envision what we can create, decides if justice wins or injustice pervades. My life has taught me that if we look around, we will quickly be able to discern where injustice lies. But if we look up, which demands that we look within, we can find new visions of what our country ought to be. That means the picture makers we must watch, the poets we must read, and the prophets we must listen to are not folks in high places. They are the folks like the ones who filled my church in Compton on Sunday. Folks on the margin, people who, despite all they've seen and been through, still believe. We can remake American democracy, and I believe this. We can remake American democracy not in the guise of white supremacy and hatred, but in the likeness of us, in the likeness of equality, freedom, and true justice for all. I believe visions for a better world still rest in all of our souls and in the soul of this nation. The fate of our country will depend on the visions we construct, the dreams we dream, the pictures we choose to make. Where there is no vision, people perish. But where there is vision and imagination, there is promise. At my desk, I picked up my pen and I started writing the speech. I started picture making, perhaps. I hope you know that the fate of our democracy depends on all of you picking up your pens too. We are the picture makers we've been waiting for. I can't wait to see what we create together. Thank you.